Vanessa from Apple Patch. I'm going to talk about half square triangles that we start to use in week 1, block 2 of the 2023 Mystery Quilt Sew Along. So a half square triangle is literally where a square is cut in half once on the diagonal, so we end up with straight of grain on the two short sides, and where we cut down through the diagonal, it's on the bias, so it's on a 45 degree, which means it's stretchy. So even though I've sewn these together, there's quite a lot of stretch. So that's a half square triangle. When we sew two triangles together, we end up with a nice square. And I want to just mention some of the things that can impact on how accurate your half square triangle squares turn out. So in the instructions I talk about a couple of methods. The first one is to cut your square at 3 7/8, which is the exact measurement, and then to either cut it on the diagonal and pair them up and sew them together, or to draw a line down the centre and then sew 1/4 inch either side away from it and then cut down the line. Now, there's pros and cons to each of these methods. The method of cutting your square to the accurate size means that you don't have to do any trimming after you've sewn them together, other than cutting off the little dog ears that you'll get. But the thing to be really careful of, now I'm kind of hoping you can see here, I should have used different coloured thread. On this side of the line, I've sewn one seam, and that is 1/4 inch away from that line. On this side, I've sewn 1/4 inch away, and then I've sewn a second line, which is just a thread width difference. If I fold, oops, make sure you're in the camera. If I fold this side over and check my measurement, that is measuring 3 1/2 inches. I'm just going to attempt to lift that up. Okay, so I can see there, oops, that is measuring to 3 1/2 inches. If I do it on the other side, where I've got two stitching lines, so one where it should be and one where it's a thread width over, and I open that out and I do my little measurement. Instead of it being 3 1/2 inches, which is what it should be, it is about 3 7/8. So I'm kind of hoping you can see there from the line, you can see the gap back to the fabric, because every tiny little bit you're out here, more than 1/4 inch, actually doubles when you open it up. So it ends up quite undersized. So if you're going to use this method where you draw the line and then you sew the 1/4 inch either side, make sure you sew a scant 1/4 inch, because once you've cut this apart and opened that up, you can always give it a tiny little haircut if you need to, but you can't add on fabric. So definitely do not do more than 1/4 inch. If anything, do a smidge bit less. So this one, you're cutting after you've sewn. I would now take that over to the iron, set that seam, and then decide whether I'm going to press to the side or press open. So I'm just going to very gently nudge that over, warm my iron back up, So with these, because this is on the bias, you have to be super careful not to stretch it. So I'm literally going to take over the iron, pop the iron down, flip it over, and plop the iron down. And my iron is just heating up. Okay. So the other thing to be really careful of is where your seam is along here, that you don't end up with sort of like that little pleat happening there. Can you see how I've kind of pulled that over? You want to make sure that seam is nice and open there, which why for some of these I recommend pressing them open because you'll get a really flat seam. Some of the blocks it will be good to actually press to the side because we're going to have a number of half square triangles together in later blocks, and by pressing to the side it will allow us to interlock the seams together when we sew them together. So this one, now I can just double check with my ruler just before I go any further. Oops, put the ruler around the right way, Vanessa. That is 3.5 inches, which it is literally just 3.5 inches, and that's using the 1/4 inch seam. Because remember, when we fold that fabric back, it takes up space. So again, if you're going to use this method with the straight line and sewing 1/4 inch away, a thread width towards the pencil line will take account of that fold of fabric, because you don't want these being undersized, even by a smidge. So even though it takes longer, I'm a fan of oversizing and then trimming back. So the 2 squares I cut for this one were 4 inches, not the 3 7/8. I'm just going to give this a really quick press before I trim it. In this case, I've opened up the seam, and I'm going to pop my ruler on the block. Oops, make sure you can see. And I am lining up, in this case, the bottom of my block, the side of my block, and the 45-degree mark on my ruler, so that I know that when I trim it back, I'm trimming my point right to where that diagonal seam is. Now I can see where I've laid that on. There's also a little bit down here that's going to need the tiniest of haircuts. Now, I know a lot of people will do this. Don't recommend it, because if you cut across, keeping that blade hard against that plastic so you get a nice accurate cut is actually really difficult, and it's also not very safe because ergonomically it's not very good. Don't recommend it. I'm going to rotate my block, and I'm going to line my diagonal line up again. Make sure it's coming through the point. And then I know this little edge here is also going to need a tiny little haircut. Very tiny haircut. And I'm just going to take that little dog ear off. So by doing the trim back method, I know that is a super accurate 3.5 inch. If I compare it to, just take these little dog ears off. If I compare it to this one, you can see there is probably don't know if you can see that there. There is probably a little threads difference. Again, that's because I used a 1/4 inch rather than a scant 1/4 inch when I sewed that diagonal line. That's how much difference it makes. So you can certainly use whichever method you prefer. If you're going to cut them to 3 7/8, just make sure that you do a scant 1/4 inch, because yeah, as I say, you can always trim back, but you can't add on fabric. So have fun making this block, and hopefully you'll post some of them onto our Facebook group. Okay, bye.